right, good afternoon, everybody. Jesse James here. So I'm here to talk to you about AI and public safety. So I have three things I'm going to kind of walk through a little framework here. Number one, I want to start with what is artificial intelligence. I think we throw these terms around quite often. There's been an evolution of technology, and so I want to kind of talk through what that definition looks like. Second, I want to talk about common use cases that have evolved and how that technology has evolved. So common use cases, in public safety and how that has evolved over time. But more importantly, to figure out or to talk through the lessons learned. What can we learn from the evolution of this technology? How it was applied? To apply it to some of the newer things that we're talking about, which is how we'll end. The generative AI and those capabilities and what we see as future trends coming. And then what police agencies should be thinking about in preparing for the adoption of this technology. So first, I wanted to just start with, when I talk to customers and we say, they ask me, what are you doing with AI? The first thing I come back to say is that we've actually been doing AI for quite some time. We are experts in this space. Really not a new technology. So I looked up the definition just to make sure I was not misstating this. And the definition is application of computer systems able to perform tasks or produce outputs normally requiring human intelligence. So when you think about that, realistically, artificial intelligence has been around way back since optical character recognition, if you've ever heard of that, right? Where you take a PDF, you scan it in a printer or whatever, a scanner, and then now you can search on that text. That is artificial intelligence. Additionally, some other examples that might be more relevant to our business: license plate recognition, translation, transcription, some other examples, redaction. These are things that here at Coreforce we've been doing for well over a decade. So we're experts in this space. We understand AI, and we'll talk about some of the new things that we're rolling out here coming up, which is around the generational AI. So there's been this evolving, aspects of technology, artificial intelligence, and generative AI is kind of the new technology that you've been hearing. So again, my takeaways here: this is an evolution of technology. It's not necessarily just a new technology. Coreforce has been a part of the evolution of that technology. We're experts in that space. And there's some things that we can learn together and make sure that agencies are prepared to adopt them. So let's talk through some use cases. I'm going to take you through a little bit of a journey here, so kind of bear with me, but I think it's relevant and help you understand how to learn from these use cases. So first of all, the purpose of technology is to solve business problems. So the primary value for artificial intelligence or AI in solving problems is how to create levels of efficiency. So I think about too much video is captured, right? As an example, how do I really sift through that and find relevant information? I've got 1,000 cameras in my suite of technology. How do I even know what cameras to look at and when? So those are examples. It's efficiency. It's about knowledge. It's about trying to capture information, knowing where to look, right? That needle in a haystack kind of example. So when I think about the evolution of some of that technology, way back, this was probably 15, 20 years ago, there was an example of using motion detection. You might be familiar with this on your Ring cameras today. You get this alert that says, hey, there was motion in my front door or whatever. That was a really early deployment of technology in police agencies. They'd have a camera that was sitting outside in the public. Maybe it was monitoring a park, and there would be motion detection identified. Well, that was great as a starting point, but the challenges with that is that you then have leaves that are moving. Now you got false alerts, and then it just becomes noise. The technology evolved, and now you're able to identify objects. Didn't know what the object was, but you knew that it wasn't a tree that was statically there most of the time, but it might have been a car, it could have been a human, it could have been a cat or whatever. Just knew it was an object. And then you could kind of create these little lines and tripwires and zones and different things to help you kind of create some knowledge around that. Well, that was great, but then there was this additional evolution where machine learning came around. You probably heard that terminology as well. It kind of wraps into this AI piece. So machine learning came around, and now you're able to analyze those objects in more detail. You're able to identify, hey, this is a human being. This is actually maybe a child, not an adult. This is a cat or a dog, not a squirrel. I could care less about certain things. So the evolution of technology through machine learning, actually training models to understand what that object came about. Then finally, this evolution really is transferred to what you see today in technology, where you're able to now classify those objects in much greater detail. So an example would be, not only now do I know it's a human, an adult, but I know it's a male versus a female. I know they're wearing a hat that's red or white or blue. I know that they're wearing shorts instead of pants. I know this vehicle is a Ford Expedition instead of just a vehicle. I know that this is a bus instead. I know it's a bicycle. So there's this evolution in technology that's taken place. Why that's important, and I think what I'm trying to ultimately communicate here, is the evolution in the past has been fairly slow in certain areas. And so the adoption of this technology and the policies and all the things in training kind of evolved over a period of time that agencies could then adopt that technology. I'll talk through a real good use case. When I was at the city of Colorado Springs, I was lucky enough to work there for 10 years. And so during my tenure there, we were deploying public-facing cameras in the public for the first time. So there were bars that they wanted to monitor for violence after they let out at 2 in the morning, but they didn't want to have blocks of patrol officers going around, so trying to know where fights were occurring and direct people to that. They also wanted to monitor parks for predative behavior. There were kids playing in parks, and unfortunately there was behavior that wasn't appropriate. And so it was the first time that they were deploying cameras in the public. So the technology was the technology part of it. That's what we're here to solve. That actually ended up being the easier part. What made this program successful is that the police agency worked very closely with the downtown business district, with the local retail shops, and then with the residents who actually lived in the area, to make sure that people understood the technology. They understood how the technology was used to increase their safety. And so then they started to create policies. They, what videos a volunteer versus a sworn officer was able to access. What would happen if, the restrictions of not allowing officers or anybody to look at inside a private residence, for example. So there was this communication and this engagement of knowledge about the technology, but also the adoption of the technology. So I think that's a really good example of, one, the evolution of technology, how it's built up ultimately to where we're going to be with generative AI that we'll talk about in a second, but that foundation was needed. But two, ultimately the deployment of this technology and the engagement with the community, the policies being established, were enabled. Another example where maybe this wasn't as valuable or beneficial or positive is the adoption of facial recognition. Now, this is a highly powerful technology, but unfortunately, it came into the market so fast, and there was so much of a great opportunity with that technology, that there wasn't this evolution of knowledge and actually how it worked, and how do you get away from profiling or capturing the correct person and making sure you have the wrong person. And so while I think agencies in general found tremendous value of it, there was a huge public outcry of it. And so there wasn't this opportunity to get that knowledge. So it ended up being where states and cities and different communities actually completely avoided the technology and created laws and saying you cannot deploy this technology anymore. That is starting to change because there's been an opportunity then to create that adoption. But that's, I think, an example of what we don't want to have happen in the deployed technology. So where does that take us to today? Generative AI is a term that gets thrown around quite a bit. Generative AI, where that's different, is now there's the actual computer that's creating content from the information that was then analyzed before, right? So you might have transcribed the video, might have evaluated the video and identified that there's a car in there, there's a gun in there, there's a whatever, and now I'm able to create content from that. That's the generative of this, right? And so we're in this evolution of this technology here, and here at Coreforce, we actually have a demonstration and capabilities probably throughout the entire booth here. We've got our real-time intelligence center who has more advanced video analytics. We've got our DEMS platform over here that has more generative AI capabilities with report writing, AI summarization. So think about recording video assets from your vehicle or from your body camera, and then translating that audio and then summarizing that information. So instead of having to go watch the video, you can review the quick summary of that video asset to say, what is this about? Is this something I actually need to take a look at? You've got sentiment analysis. So this would be the ability to, based off of the transcription of the video, identify from keywords whether it was a positive, neutral, or possibly a negative experience. So again, a way to guide people to solving these same problems of too much content to watch. And then finally, we've got AI report assistant capabilities. And this is something that we've been working for well over a year with customers very closely. Take very serious the privacy capabilities, the accuracy capabilities, and the lack of policy that's out there today to launch this capability. So we can share with you what we're doing and who we're piloting with and when this will be available for you. But our approach to this is taking the transcribed video as well as enabling the notes or contribution from the officer to be able to put additional context into this report as a draft. Now then that information can be taken and copied and pasted into whatever format that's it, but it gives the officer a chance. Even the officer has to acknowledge that this report was written by AI. There's auditability that's built into that as well, so there's transparency in that technology. So that's our approach to this. We take this adoption of technology that I mentioned before and the need for community engagement, the need for knowledge of the technology, and the need for policy very seriously. And so that's the approach that we're taking to AI. I think a couple other points that I want to make, maybe before we kind of move to a little bit of closure here, is where do we see the trends going from the use of AI? So I think there's three specific trends I see in the public safety space that are relevant to the use of body-worn cameras, in-car video, and digital evidence management. So we focus on a lot of transcription of the audio from the video. That's one example. Where we see this moving to then is more of a multimodal capability, right? So you've got audio as one mode, video is another, and so there's the ability then to take that information and make it more relevant to the actual video content. You can, in the report, communicate not only what the officer said or what audio was transcribed, but you'd also be able to say that the gun was identified, or that this particular vehicle or this license plate or that type of thing is now automatically added in the report. That's I think the first step that I see here. The next one is predictive models to be able to prioritize the evidence that's coming in. So less than 10% of assets, video assets that are captured, are actually viewed. Well, that's 90%, I mean thousands and thousands of hours of video that might have relevant information to a case that could be viewed. So how do you know which videos to process? So this predictive model based off of whatever information, it could have been a particular type of 911 call, choosing to go ahead and process that video through the AI tools to give data of relevance, would be an example to prompt people to look at that, to then add that information proactively into the report would be, I think, a great example of a trend. And then I see the increased evolution of DEMS. We talk about DEMS, primarily the contribution to a digital evidence management system is video from a body camera, from maybe the license plate hits, maybe information from a vehicle, a video from a vehicle. But there's a ton of other digital assets that are disparate out in the industry. So getting that information in and then having AI be able to search through that, maybe proactively search for information and bring relevance based off of information, or through a prompt and saying, hey, this is the situation, I want to understand what assets are relevant to that. So this is the evolution that I see has happening in AI that we're proactively looking at as an organization, and I think that customers will demand over time. So I'd like to close with what I believe is the theme that I've been trying to highlight here. One is that AI is evolution, as I mentioned here, but responsible AI requires a vendor who is willing to be transparent with you on how they're developing the AI technology and not just rushing into the market to solve a problem to drive revenue. Second, and I would highlight that a lot of this information has also been captured from, if you're not familiar with IJIS Institute, they're an organization that has done a playbook for how to implement AI as an organization. So we can provide you a link as a trusted partner and someone who can help guide you how to deploy AI in your area. But some of the other things and lessons learned from this is make sure that you have policies established, dive deep into the technology, do community outreach so people understand what you're doing in your organization that ultimately will use some of the examples that we talked earlier and not be the facial recognition version of the technology. So that's all I have for you today. I think that's the evolution that we see in technology. If there's questions in the audience, I'm happy to take.
I do have